And Dan Conway, who wrote a book, How to Be a Crypto Millionaire. I was on India's national blockchain team, so I go off to New Delhi and Bangalore and work with Indian government. And my first trip out there, a bunch of the people were bringing me this book to autograph. And I'm like, oh, that's not me. I'm not that Dan Conway. It's a common Irish name. And after the second day, I just started signing them. So, but no, I'm not that person. I do have a billion Dan coin, because it only takes about 3 minutes to create your own currency. They're currently not worth anything, but I have expectations that they will improve. So I'm part of Arkansas. We have a blockchain center. We have the information sciences professor, international professor of the year is our director, and she is the brand, and she generally does all the public-facing stuff because I embarrass them. But I fill the roles which she doesn't fill, so I have a technical understanding of things that are going on. And then Catherine does all the work. So I'm 50% in blockchain, 50% in information systems. But we have a nice center. It's funded by about 15 companies who you would expect to be interested in the topic and so on. So anyway, I've been asked to talk about some of these things. Feel free to take me off course, and I'll talk for about a half hour or so, and then we can, I've already done 15. Then I probably, if I can't answer your questions, I bet I know who can. Because I know sort of the players. Some of my friends are multi-billionaires because they didn't have 7 kids. It turns out you can make it through life without spending money if you don't have a bunch of children. My wife's graduate program today is, the money I took out for that is worth about $7 billion today, if I had held on to that. She teaches here in Rogers kindergarten. Very sad, but it made her happy, I guess. So I'll go through, it's worthwhile to see some of the history of why, because that was the hardest part for me, was the conceptual stuff. The technology, you know, you can dig into that and figure it out eventually, but the why of it I thought was really kind of hard, because there are gobs and gobs of these virtual currencies, and I've created dozens myself. I've done it for different companies. I've done it for people who want to pay their kids' allowance in cryptocurrency. You get clean the garage coin and do the dishes coin and make your bed coin. And once you've created enough of these coins, if you've got 10 do the dishes coin, you can trade it for a movie or something like that. So there's ways that you can monetize forms of value that you probably never thought of before. And then it's happening in almost every domain, which is real trouble for our government, who's trying to understand all this. So I'm going to head out in 2 weeks, testify to the Senate Commerce Committee on what should the government's response to this be. And my answer will be, well, 7 years ago it should have been, because we're all kind of waiting on the government to do something. I put an article in Forbes a month ago on the Ripple lawsuit, which has been stuck in the Southern District of New York for 7 years now, and it's had 70,000 downloads. People are kind of waiting on the government to kind of come up with a framework. And we don't anticipate the government's going to be right, but give us some things so that we can fix it later and improve upon it. We just have to take the first step. Consensus is another thing that you'll see dozens, and this is unfortunately created by computer science people, so the language is not language that you're used to using. But the concepts aren't so bad once you kind of get over the technical language that people are using. Fortunately, we have academics who say things like this. Okay, and we have all kinds of people who come up with reasons why this is a terrible idea, and they're all compelling, and who knows if they're going to be right. But I would suggest that based on the activity around the world, and our blockchain center is working with China and Walmart to get all the chicken food supply chain and poultry and pork food supply chain on blockchain, so it's traceable. So we've removed almost all the salmonella from Chinese markets just by being traceable back to the farm, knowing exactly where it came from. Raytheon, Northrop Grumman would love to know where their software comes from. They don't know. They don't have a supply chain that tells them who wrote this dependency in the open source world. We're trying to fix that too. But Walmart knows more about where its mangoes come from than Raytheon knows where its missile software comes from. And it's all through blockchain. But anyway, I wouldn't necessarily look to academics to understand this stuff because they have fought this topic. I think I taught the first blockchain class in 2017. I had 4 people attend. And then a year later, I had 4 people attend because nobody kind of, in the academic world, the incentives are not right for innovation. You really have to maybe be outside. But the history of this is pretty interesting, and the people who introduced me to this space were both strong libertarians in the sense that they wanted to shrink the size of government, but they're also very anti-Federal Reserve people. And the creature from Jekyll Island, you know, the Federal Reserve is destroying the economy and fiat currencies, and all this terrible stuff's going to happen, which world history suggests that, yes, it will happen. Hopefully not on my watch is the current strategy. But these are the people who created this, or people who didn't like the way the central banks were spending money, were producing great debt for our children. Even George Washington said it's immoral to leave debt for the next generation. We seem to have gotten over that. And then, of course, the empire strikes back, because when you're looking to replace the monetary system, you are challenging the most powerful people in world history. And they're not going to sort of take that very well. So if you look through the top 15 companies in the world, there's only 2 of them that didn't try to kill Bitcoin. And remember, Bitcoin is decentralized. It doesn't have a marketing department, it doesn't have a legal department. There's nobody standing up for it. You have a bunch of technology people who released a program. And who went after it? Bill Gates, Jamie Dimon. Bill Gates says it's killing people. You have the head of the European Central Bank speaking of it in the most vile terms that you can imagine, the European say. In America, we say vile things all the time, but the Europeans are usually a little more reserved, but it's reprehensible stuff. So the only 2 companies that didn't try to kill this were Walmart and McKesson. Every other large company, which is, you know, your large banks and Berkshire Hathaway and Disney and others, didn't necessarily want to change the status quo. And I had calls from people in Congress who, you know, can't we seize Bitcoin at the border or, you know, through customs? I said, oh, that's not really how it works. But I've never seen anything where you couldn't, I mean, in the early days, you couldn't buy it with a credit card. You couldn't advertise on TV or social media or radio. They blocked it from everything. So the people who were gaining the coins were those of us who had labs at our disposal. So I had a lab at Northwestern, I had a lab at Iowa State, and I was generating Bitcoin every night. You don't necessarily want a currency that only 20 people have, right? You want to have it distributed. The world tried to kill it, and it didn't work. Now, when I think of what problem are we solving, so when companies call me with their ideas for innovation, new business, you always ask them a number of standard questions. What problem are you trying to solve? What problem is Bitcoin trying to solve? Really, if you think of it as a Westerner, you have a different answer to that than if you're a citizen of Pakistan or India or Iran or Russia today, that you don't fully trust your government. If you live in an Islamic country, you can't use modern banking because it's not Islamic to do that. So you either put money under your mattress with a big knife to guard it, or you go into cryptocurrency so that you can kind of take advantage of modern finance without, you know, your neighbors knowing you're doing it. But to me, what's really happening is we're starting, if we think of an organization as people, process, and technology, all of our software has always been written with that framework, and all of our laws are written, our taxation is written of the organization, people, process, and technology. And it kind of reminded me of, you think back to the people who measured the universe, how big is the universe, how heavy is the universe, they must have a very large scale, and they put the universe on it, and they said, hey, we've misplaced 85% of the universe, we don't know where it is. And they all scratched their chins collectively, and then they decided, there's this visible universe, which is about 15%, and then there's this dark matter that nobody knew was out there. And that accounts for the majority of the universe. And that's kind of what's been happening is Bitcoin is sort of represents the infrastructure of an interorganizational dark matter, right? So we have these organizations, which are companies, and then as companies trade with each other, we figure out how to do that. We have value-added networks, and we have peer-to-peer, and we have some systems that allow supply chains. But as it turns out, 85% of commerce is actually in between organizations, and there was never a reason to build a database or a system in between because we didn't know there was anything in there until we kind of measured it and said, hey, we're missing stuff. So what Bitcoin did is it kind of created this inter-organizational space that there's nobody there and there's no one to write a check to. You're not incentivized to build anything in between two companies because the companies have money. In between, there's no money there. Why would you spend time writing something that there's no one there to pay you? So you've never had it before. What blockchain does is creates an inter-organizational information system. And that's brilliant. Somebody wrote something for something that nobody knew was even there. It was like invisible. And since then, well, now let's put all of our data in the middle. Now let's put our process stuff, our smart contracts, and let's put some governance in the middle. And now we have a totally different way of organizing. And this is really appealing to young people because they don't like the idea of going into digital transformation, taking old companies and making them more modern, because that's change management and it means firing people and things that no young people want to do that. Nobody really likes to do that. But it changes maybe not the way you want to start your career. You'd rather go off into a green space that nobody lives in, because we didn't know this part of the universe existed. You'd rather go off and build something in that space. So the young people of the world are all going into this stuff. It's really culturally fascinating. Right now, universities across America are 60% female because so many males are not going to college anymore. They're kind of getting into this space. And this is Metaverse and all the stuff that you hear. So there's big sociological changes going on. But to me, what's happening kind of with blockchain is that we've discovered the space in between organizations, and blockchain is a solution to that. And now it's just a matter of figuring out monetization. So I started the blockchain within the Society of Automotive Engineers. So we have very interesting cases. Any car you buy today has a blockchain on it. And it's like a black box. It's keeping track of how hard you accelerate, how hard you brake. And you'll build up Mercedes coin if you drive environmentally friendly. So if you don't accelerate real hard, you get points. Coins, and you can trade those for auto parts or to go to auto shows or something like that. Ford Motor has lots of patents. They have the most patents in blockchain, about 160 for automotive blockchain. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, so I have a former student who runs that. I taught at Notre Dame for a number of years, and she was a PhD student at Notre Dame, and she runs this. But I drive actually very slow because I'm not really in a hurry and I'm a grandpa. I'm supposed to drive slow and be thoughtful. So I drive kind of slow, but my wife, who's with kindergartners all day, drives really fast because the wine is at home and she wants to get there. So she'd come up behind, and what you'd normally do is you'd honk or blink your lights or get awkwardly close and let the person know you'd like to pass. While I'm driving slow, I have something of value, right? I have this spot on the road. It's actually a relative position because the spot's going to move. And it's not going to be there for long because eventually there's going to be a path around me. But in the short term, I have something valuable. Can I sell it to her? Okay, that's what we think about in blockchain and cryptocurrency, is finding new forms of value that you never thought were valuable before. Can I sell it to somebody else? A parking spot. A spot in line I went to the baseball game at Arvis Field this weekend. A spot in line at the hot dog stand, $1 hot dogs generates 50 people in line. I'd like to kind of buy the third spot in line. Can that person has something very valuable, and I'd like to buy it. What happens with your vehicles today, and these are all built into Ford vehicles, is the car behind me can make an offer to my car, something we call a smart contract, and pay me crypto. So I would have a rule set saying, well, if you pay me this much Ford coin, then I will pull over and you can pass me. It sets up virtual fast lanes. And there's moral hazard, right? Because now I want to drive even slower, and Uber drive, so there's moral hazard issues and there's ethics issues and so on. But the basics of the patent is you have something valuable, this person wants what you have as a position in the road, they can initiate a payment to you. Your car says pull over, you've been compensated, and boom, off they go. So there's all kinds of forms of value that we never think of that can be through automation and smart contracts and blockchains be exchanged. And that's what the young kids are all thinking right now. And it's a fascinating space. I'm involved in lots of these kinds of projects. So why would we do any of this? Well, disintermediation was one of the main things that started it. And that if you're in the middle, I don't have to pay lawyers $300 an hour, $500 an hour. For example, the oil and gas world uses trucks to haul saltwater from a plant off to a saltwater body and pays money for that. And sometimes the amount that ends up there isn't the same amount that left the plant because somebody went like that with the valve. And some of the water dripped out. So leakage occurs. In that case, actual leakage. It's a common supply chain term, but in that case, they do actually leak stuff out because then they don't have to pay as much when they get out there. Well, that can be all done with blockchain now so that we know exactly how much left. It's immutable. The data structure can't change. So however much left the plant better be what arrives here. And the people who are going to get billed will get billed through blockchain, just like the car get billed automatically. I don't have to worry about that. There's 90 million truck journeys a year that do this. Walmart now has its Canadian trucking all on blockchain. And they used to have 70% of their trucks had reconciliation problems. In other words, here's what I say is on my truck, and here's what you say is on my truck, and here's what they said was on my truck, and it never matched because of this shrinkage sort of leakage thing. And the truck driver and the guard are arguing back and forth who really have no idea what's on, whose words should be kept. And it's, well, let's just average it because there's 10 more trucks waiting and we'll sign off. And now that's all done with blockchain, so there's no humans, there's no attorneys involved. It all is the single version of the truth is this inner organizational thing that keeps track of what goes on trucks and what comes off trucks. And we know exactly when everything happened. And because it's immutable, nobody could have hacked into it and changed it. Special operations drones are like this. They have two blockchains on. So a drone swarm has two jobs. One is to not run into the drone next to you, right? So that code is on Ethereum. And we want that to be immutable. We don't want the adversaries to hack in and change the code and purposely run into your neighbors. And then the code that does the vision and the image recognition is kind of running on the outer drones. So they pay the inner drones to use their processors to do the vision calculations. So we see value exchange, even if it's within one organization. We see all kinds of ways to do a value exchange. So disintermediation, in other words, we don't need a banking system. We can trade with each other as the original Bitcoin use case. But there's a lot of different things that we get to take advantage of in Bitcoin and blockchain. And it's anything from cleaning the oceans to money laundering, human trafficking. I've done some of that with United Nations. I've done some things with the Vatican in poverty. All these things have blockchain solutions. And of course, with a lot of them, there are people that don't want solutions. That's your 13 companies who didn't want that. They're the ones who profit from human trafficking. JP Morgan flagships run the human trafficking and drug trade. They don't necessarily want transparency. There's a lot of enemies. In the Metaverse, okay, so we're quite active in the Metaverse. We're seeing about $40 billion a month bought and sold land in just Decentraland, Metaverse, virtual reality space. People are spending hundreds of millions of US dollars to buy space in these things. Walmart's building out their metaverse. The idea is you're in there shopping and there's 3 blenders in front of you and you wonder what the difference is between these blenders. Well, somebody beams into your metaverse and says, I've owned all 3. The first one's good for margaritas, the second one does good juice drinks, and the third one broke a lot. And you have a conversation because they're human beings. And then you choose the one in the middle because you have extremist version. And then if you choose to buy it, you use the Walmart blockchain, Walmart coin, and you buy the thing. And then they're setting up for drone deliveries up in Springdale. So within an hour, you will have that drone delivered to your home through the Walmart metaverse. There's all kinds of metaverses, but the way that you're going to exchange value will all be through forms of cryptocurrency. So yeah, this is a strange world that we're entering into, but it's old. I know some of the folks that worked on the Stanford Library project in the 90s. And librarians, as you know, are amazing. If anybody says, you do this act, I will, forever you will have 70 virgins in heaven. It's like, I'd rather have 10 librarians, for all eternity. If you're going to be in eternity, you want really interesting people. And some of the interesting things that have gone on through library technologies, they really created the first blockchain at Stanford. Lots of copies keep stuff safe, locks. David Rosenthal, who was chief technology officer at Sun and created NVIDIA, kind of ran the Stanford library system too. But they created the stuff in the 90s. So this isn't sort of cutting edge stuff. Now the way it works is just like checks. So I have checks and Susan has checks, and Susan feels this she's compelled to send me money. You can kind of see it when you look at her. She's like, I wish I could send you money. Yeah, I get that. Everybody should kind of feel that. So the way Bitcoin works is just like writing checks, except there's no date on it. The date is sort of when it appears into a block is what the date comes. The rest of it is just like writing checks. So Susan wants to give me 6.25 Bitcoin. What will happen is Susan, this check will go on to a list of checks that will have this particular data structure. But think of it as the checks are just piling up. Eventually, after about 10 minutes, we put the checks in a box and we write on the outside of it, this much money was transmitted. There were this many A's and there were this many 5s and blah, blah. We write some stuff on it called a hash, but some mathematical summary of what's in the box. And then the next box, we take that thing and put that on the inside, and then we write more checks, and that becomes another block, just stacks of checks and then stacks of checks. So we're up to 600 and some thousand boxes of checks. And that's all Bitcoin is. It's a digital form of putting checks on top of each other. In other words, there is no such thing as Bitcoin. There are no tangible coins. There are just checks that Susan wants to write me a check. She has to have money. How do we know she has money? Well, go back in time because you can go back and read every check and you can see where she got the money. And then where did that money come from? All the way back to it originated with these miners, people like me who created these things and are still creating them. So a blockchain is really just a stack of checks. It's just that periodically we put a box around them and move on to the next box. Now, who gets to do that, the governance of it, who gets to create the box? That's really important because anybody whose check didn't go into that box doesn't get recorded. So there may be 100,000 people competing to put things in the box and the stack of checks, but only one's going to win every 10 minutes. They're going to win a contest because all 100,000 aren't going to agree to what should go in this box. That's strange. So I want to step through this real quick, but what Bitcoin, the way it works, so Susan wants to send me a Bitcoin, and she has 3. She's actually a whale, meaning she has thousands of them, but in this particular account, let's say she has 3 Bitcoin. She wants to send me one, and you have to spend all of it, and then you take the change, which is why some of my friends have never spent any Bitcoin, because then you have to pay tax if you do this. This is a taxable event. And if you never do that, you don't have to pay tax. You become a citizen of El Salvador, and then you don't have to pay tax. So she wants to send me a check for 1, which means she has to write a check to herself for 2. Okay, so she forms this transaction, I'll call it transaction 42, the meaning of life transaction. And the people who are collecting these things, the checks, don't have much incentive to do this for you unless you pay them a tip. So she may only give herself back 1.9999 and leave a little bit for the miner. So the miner says, look, you want me to include your check in my stack of checks? Show me the love. Give me some of your change. You can take the chance of not doing that, and the miners may not ever put your check in. Or you can give them a 20-cent tip, or Ethereum now is about $50. You have to give them a tip. Some of the Bitcoin prices when it was going up were very expensive. People, $1,000, yeah. Now, since this thing doesn't get written for every 10 minutes, that gives you time to pay the miner a big chunk of money if you want yours to go near the beginning. So front loading, with Flash Boys, if you ever read that book, talks about how you get your transaction in front of other transactions. If you see a great big purchase coming, you know that's going to raise the price. You get your transaction there in front of them. You can do that. You got 10 minutes in Bitcoin. You don't have to put fiber through the middle of a room like they do in Wall Street. You have 10 minutes to just pay a miner and say, look, here's $1,000. Put my transaction first so I get in ahead of this other stuff. There's a lot of potential for interesting behavior going. So the question is, where did Susan get her 3 Bitcoin? Well, she got it from somebody else who got it from somebody else who eventually got it from somebody who mined it. And the mining started at $50 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes, which is why probably 70,000 of them at one time. And then it was 25 and then 12 and a half. Now it's about 6 1/4 Bitcoin. For every block, whoever the miner that wins that block, sort of the lottery happens, whoever wins that block gets 6 1/4 Bitcoin, which is a bit of money, $240-some thousand, maybe 250,000 every 10 minutes gets produced in this blockchain. Okay, so we don't really use names and addresses, we use account numbers, and these account numbers come from some math. It's real hard to reverse. Google's spending millions to try to reverse this. We've had some children, seems like by age 12 or 13, they peak in their abstract algebra until they get formally educated. But sometimes 12 to 14-year-old kids can solve cryptography problems. So we've had some progress. There's a 14-year-old girl in Dublin who had made progress toward reversing elliptical encryption. But it's been around. I took a course in it in the 80s. It's been around a long time. It secures almost all of your, people ask me, well, what if somebody breaks Bitcoin? I say, well, you'll know it because they will have broken the Federal Reserve backbone and the banking and exchange network and all communication everywhere. If they do that and break into derivative space, then Bitcoin is a dinky little thing compared to this. So you'll know if somebody breaks this because the whole financial system will collapse. So that's how I know they haven't broken it. Okay, so how did I get my wallet? How did you get your address? Well, if you download or you buy a hardware wallet, it has a bunch of these numbers in them. Okay, so again, we're on transaction 42. What happened? So Susan broadcast this out in a peer-to-peer network. So all 100,000 or 2 million machines, we don't know how many are out there, send it to each other. And it's a BitTorrent protocol. It's what Napster used. And if Napster could be killed, Sony would have killed it. So we don't know how to kill peer-to-peer networks. But Susan broadcast it out and sort of everybody gets it. So Hannah's one of these Bitcoin miners, works here in her closet. She runs miners at night when no one's looking. She was probably using the computer that was projecting here that nobody knew about to mine Bitcoin. And she's out there listening, and she's doing 2 things. She's trying to win this lottery. So you generate as many random numbers as you can, which uses a lot of electricity, trying to generate a magic number that has some magical math properties. It changes every 10 minutes. She's doing that with one hand. The other hand, collecting all these checks and putting them in her box. And if she wins the lottery, which is, again, $250,000 every 10 minutes, if she wins, then her box becomes the box for everybody. Okay, so everybody gets a copy of her box. We all start from scratch again for the next 10 minutes, roughly 10 minutes. And that's what a miner is doing. It's just generating random numbers as fast as it can. So the better processor you have, the server farm you have, the more random numbers you can create, the more likely you'll create one that has some mathematical properties to it that give you the advantage to win $250,000. Okay, so let's say Hannah, the miner, wins, and when she wins, she gets 6.25 Bitcoin from the network. The network does the math, says, yep, you got it, you guessed the magic number. So you win, you get to take your box with these checks stacked in it. I'm number 42, and that becomes officially part of the ledger. And then the next box is created, the next box is created. Then it runs 24 hours a day, and it keeps going. And whenever you win pretty good sized money. So that's kind of what's happening. Now, what happens if, so I went to Indiana, so I always have to make fun of Purdue people whenever I can. So what if Paul Purdue comes in and says, hey, she broadcasts this transaction to the network. I'm going to change from giving herself the change. I'm going to change it to my address, right? So Dan will still get one because that's the right thing to do. But Paul says, hey, instead of giving the change back, I'm going to put my account number there. And then I'm going to take all the change. And as it turns out, the digital signature mathematics won't work on it. People will discard that transaction. So the way something is digitally signed with private keys and so on, that makes it so that nobody can do this. The other thing is Susan's a busy person and does a lot. And sometimes she forgets that she already sent off that Bitcoin. And if she tries to send it off to Bill, the miner would reject it and say, nope, because everything's serialized. These checks are all stacked on top of each other. There's a definite order to them. You can go back and look and say, nope, that money's already been sent. So it would get rejected. So we can't double spend. It's secure from the point of view that nobody can change what you've created. It's secure that you can't spend the money twice. So it's the conclusion to how Bitcoin and thus most blockchains work. First of all, there's not anything as Bitcoin. There's only something that keeps track of how much stuff is being sent around. So think of it as a vault that's never been opened that has 21 million Bitcoin in it. It's never been opened, so no one's ever actually seen what's in there. It's just on the outside, it keeps track of kind of who owns how much and in detail of when they got it and when they gave it up. So there is actually no such thing, but it does work. And do we need a central bank? There's several countries now that are playing with the concept of making this their money. How do I purchase crypto? Best is to get it from a friend, because then you don't pay transaction fees, because banks are going to charge you 3 to 5% to use a credit card. There are some sites that are coming online now that will do it cheaper. You can go through something like Coinbase with your credit card. If you go to local meetups, Ripple's starting one in Bentonville. We have a Northwest Arkansas blockchain, Fayetteville. I live in Springdale. I go between the two. So there's generally people that want some U.S. currency, and they'll sell you some of their crypto, and then you don't have to pay the 3%, which is actually a lot of money. Strike is a site that is giving crypto at cost, so you're not paying credit card fees and other fees. Where is it after you purchase it? There is no such thing as Bitcoin. I just said, so what am I buying? Well, what you're buying is an entry that says only you can send this Bitcoin to somebody else. That's a different concept. Normally when you buy something, you put it in your hand and hey, I've got it. In this case, you are just buying the right to send to somebody else. So there is no actual Bitcoin. Where is that right held? It's held in your wallet. So in your browser extension or your hardware wallet contains a password that says, only I have the right to send this around. So send one around. Let's not ask about that. But there's 21 million of them, and I get to send one of them to whoever I want, or a fraction of it out to 12 decimal places. In the case of Ethereum, out to 18 decimal places. I can make it real narrow. So once I have something purchased, how do I get one of these other 15,000 coins? Well, I typically would go to what would be called a swap, or I could do it from within Coinbase. So my friends write these swap spaces. So if I want to trade a Bitcoin for a Cardano, I could go onto one of these websites that somebody's provided liquidity. It's very similar to the way traditional finance would work. So someone's provided liquidity, you put the Bitcoin in, out pops the Cardano in the right amount, and the liquidity provider gets a small fraction. Some of these swap spaces I am in them will have 200% returns on them. Pretty good returns if you provide crypto liquidity to swap spaces. So I provided a bunch to some decentralized virtual private network swap spaces, which were created in Ukraine. I thought would do really well here in the last month, but they haven't seen a big jump in it. But I thought, I bet the Ukrainians want to use decentralized virtual private networks, but I haven't made a lot of money from it yet. But it's a guaranteed return, 200% a year is a pretty good return. You can get things really anywhere from about 50% to 190% right now, return rates on these swaps. So there's good money in what we call decentralized finance, swapping one token for another token. Browser extensions is sort of how you would use your browser to check how much crypto you have, because you can't call anybody. There's no marketing, there's no legal, there's nobody. So how do you know what you have? You have a wallet, so I have one. Actually, I just turned in this machine to the university yesterday. I have to go get it because I've got about $8,000 of crypto on it that I forgot about. Until I saw this slide, I thought, oh man, I got to go back to my computer and get it. Because I've got 369 trillion SWRs, which is liquidity providing in some of these spaces. And that seems like a lot, but each one's worth, a billionth of a penny or something like that. So that what seems like a lot there comes down to about $8,000. So it's a really strange vocabulary, but different digital currencies can be used for different things. I talked to Anheuser-Busch rep in town here, and they're setting up their metaverse. They're having concerts, right? So Blake Shelton and people like that, Luke Bryan, who sing songs. And in the metaverse, you'll put your goggles on, you'll go to the concert where everybody has a front row seat. And if you wear a Bud Light shirt during the concert, and you can prove you had it on when you walked in and in your avatar, so you're not physically wearing it, your avatar in the concert is wearing it. And then when you leave the gate, Bud Light sends you a 12-pack. It's a very fascinating space. So they're doing product placement in Metaverse, all based on this token economics. So Bitcoin is just a really beginning piece of an entire economy that's based on tokens and trading tokens. So you basically trade your Bud Light t-shirt when you leave the concert for earthly coupon, basically a free 12-pack of Bud Light. But this is how you kind of find out how much you have. And again, I'm glad I looked at this because I got to get into the office tomorrow before they recycle my machine. There's thousands of swap sites to swap from one currency to another. You can send me an email if you want to play with any of the stuff. Again, you can provide $100 liquidity and get a 200% return. So there's lots of stuff going on. And I figure over 10 years, that's a pretty good return if I can keep doing that. Some of my friends do technical trading in this space the same way that you would in a normal equity market. And you're looking at oscillator indexes and RSI's momentum measures. The same way that you look at any stock, we have the ability to buy and sell based on these things. What are smart contracts? And then I'll let you guys ask any questions you have. But smart contracts are just pieces of code. They're the process of people, process, and technology. And all they do is execute. So instead of Susan sending me one Bitcoin, she may have a conditional contract that says, I'm not going to send it to him until 6:30. When he's done. In case he leaves early, he's not going to get the one Bitcoin. So it's just putting rules around when things get sent. I've got 7 kids, so if I have 7 Bitcoin, I could have a bank and trust hire them to disperse it when I die, or I could have a smart contract that says, and by the way, a bank and trust about 15%. So 40,000 times 280, it cost me about $35,000 to do that, to disperse my wealth, my 7 Bitcoins to my children. If I do it on a smart contract, it scans the obituaries. When it finds me, it transfers mine to their wallets. It costs nothing. Okay, so this, again, it's a disintermediation of a traditional financial entity, and it's all done through code, which is really what a bank is. It's a digital entity working through code. DAOs are the governance part of this inter-organizational space, and they're a real fascinating sort of thing as well. It's again, you're not having to digitally transform anything because there's nothing there. So how do you build a totally digital organization, the governance, and who gets the profits and all those rules is what we call a DAO. Very fascinating place. Are there risks to this? Yeah, because banks actually provide value beyond holding your money. They, if you lose your card, they can help you get it back. They do identity management. They look for anomalies and so on. Somebody using your card to buy a Clavinova when you've never shown any interest in that before. So banks do provide a lot of services. You have somebody to call. In the crypto world, if you lose your key, it's gone. I've got thousands of Bitcoin that have been lost over the years. Remember, they weren't worth anything, so we weren't real careful. Until they were worth a penny and a half. Then we started backing up everything because that was real money. But yeah, I've lost the equivalent today of probably $1 billion of worth of Bitcoin because, again, at the time they weren't worth anything, and you can't, if you lose your key, it's gone. Nobody can unlock it. It's sitting there on the blockchain. It says it's mine, but I don't have the key to prove it's mine. So it's there forever. We think about 3 million out of the 21 total million are people who have lost keys, me and my buddies who just were sloppy. Well, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. So if Web 1 was brochureware, taking the internet and displaying the content, pushing content. Web 2 was the social network where you push content and we share content. Web 3 is sort of Web 2 plus trading value with each other. Do I need a department of motor vehicles? Can't I just take my phone? And a friend of mine has a patent on the gyroscope that you can go like that and sell your car to the person. They have to have, it says, catch the car, and boom, and the gyroscope will contact through Bluetooth, and the motion of that tells the application to sell your car. We showed that to the Illinois motor vehicle people, and they fired the guy because they said that was going to cost them 35,000 union jobs if they got rid of that department. So, boom, you're gone. But Web3 is going to change a lot of the stuff because it gives us a mechanism to exchange value. And again, value could be a parking spot. There's a lot of forms of value. So anyway, feel free to email me anytime. I'm happy to answer questions. And again, if I don't know it, which is maybe 95% of this space, I lead the U.S. standards body in this to the International Standards Organization. I'm active in a lot of government and security sorts of spaces. I have a few startup companies of my own. I probably know somebody who could answer your question if I can't myself. So if all this Bitcoin and blockchain makes sense, think more about it because it's a really strange concept. But the dollar itself is a strange concept. A dollar is sort of a promise that you can have a fraction of future labor of the economy. Because we have taxation privilege, we can take a fraction of the future labor and give it to you in the form of bond short for bondage, right? So a dollar is probably not what you think it is either, but this is a really strange world, and I'm working with a bank in Wyoming that has very favorable laws to try to establish a bank, a digital asset bank that is both traditional banking as well as digital asset, NFTs, and so on. And the idea is if the fiat world collapses, you have a mechanism to go into this other space seamlessly. We don't need riots and things like that if our monetary system collapses. I had U.S. attorneys call me 2 weeks ago. They're trying to set up a similar bank in New Jersey. We're all kind of waiting for the government to give the regulatory framework for it, but once that's done, and I'll push them, in Washington in a couple of weeks, but I'll push them to give us something. Just please give us something. Because there's a lot of innovation that's just waiting to happen for the government to just tell us what you're going to tax, tell us what the rules are. We're happy to follow the rules, but we just need rules. But anyway, what questions you have? Again, I can find the answers if I don't know them myself. It's a really strange space, though. And it took me 3 years to figure out not how it worked, but why anybody would do anything so crazy as print your own money. But now I understand. But again, I had a lot to unlearn. Students don't have as much to unlearn as we do. I had to unlearn how the money system worked, how the Federal Reserve works. And I had to unlearn, none of us, my wife teaches pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters in kindergarten. We have to unlearn all that stuff back to kindergarten. I don't even remember where I went to school in kindergarten. But I have to unlearn a bunch of stuff to let this stuff soak in. But again, there's forms of value that can be exchanged that you've never thought about before, but people are thinking about it, monetizing value exchange. So the world's going to be a very interesting place for a while. There'll be big winners, big losers, and those who control the world right now, the JP Morgans and Goldman Sachs and BlackRock, they are trying to kill this off the way Constantine tried to kill Christianity until he could control it. Then you adopt it and you point its toes in the direction you want to go. So world history shows that if you can't beat something as decentralized as Christianity was at the time, what you need to do is adopt it in a way that you can leverage it for your own good. And that's what the big banks have done. Goldman Sachs put $20 billion into blockchain, but they did it in Estonia. They didn't do it in the United States. JP Morgan's put billions and billions, but not in the United States. They do it elsewhere because they want to wait until they have told the regulators what to do about it. And then once they do, then they'll incorporate it into their systems. But they're not doing it in the United States. US is way behind this. I can say that with confidence because I meet with international groups every week and the various standards bodies of this stuff, and the US is way behind. It's not that we're dumb, it's just that our innovators are doing this overseas because our regulators have not given us any framework.
Can you stay out of the centralized exchanges?
I stay out of the centralized exchanges.
Or they could track it better or something?
Well, there's counterparty risk. So a centralized exchange like Coinbase, if you put your money in Coinbase, and MTGOX and some of the early sites have all been hacked, likely from the inside, right? Because you tempt people with a little, it works. You tempt them with a lot, and it works really well. But if you have $30 billion and you're on the inside, I'll just take a little bit of this, that becomes a lot. So when you use a centralized exchange, you're trusting them, and there's no FDIC. There's nobody, if they take it or go down, it's gone. And I had some money in a Russian exchange 5 years ago, and Dignity Coin. I had about 5 million of the total 50 billion or something. I had a good proportion of it. And somebody in Russia hacked it and took it all. Turn. And there's nobody to call. So I tend to, if I'm going to have anything of substance, I'll buy it through that or I'll acquire it through that, but then I'll transfer it to a hardware thing. And I usually print it out then. I don't even leave the device online. I'll print it out, and then I have safety deposit boxes in a few places, and I will put them physically in a safety deposit box. My friends who have the billions of dollars of this stuff have safety deposit boxes in Germany and Australia and New Zealand. They distribute their stuff through paper in safety deposit boxes around the world. Or they'll put part of the key in 10 places, and then they'll send us parts of the keys and we all exchange with each other. And it may be an algorithm where you need 6 out of 10 people to agree. If this person has passed away, we need a K of N, 6 out of 10 people to agree, combine the keys, and then those assets get distributed in the way that we know that that person wanted them. So it's a totally different world if you avoid banking. But it can be done. But yeah, banks do provide value. They provide service and they provide comfort, and you have a number to call. And chances are, the Bank of America is not going away. That was created by women of the Revolutionary War, figuring their husbands were all going to get killed. They pooled their assets and created Bank of America. So you think that'll be around for a while? I hope Harvest is around for a long time and so on. But the world's going to require our banking system to handle other forms of value besides U.S. currency. And we just need the regulators to tell us what we need to do. I have a friend who former student, provides blockchain pricing data to the Chicago Board of Exchange because they have Bitcoin futures and options markets and so on. And he and his buddy, who live in their parents' basements, stream data to the Chicago Board of Exchange on the prices of Bitcoin and the other prices of all these things. And there's an equivalent company in Brazil that they've set up to do it with the Brazilian futures markets. And so they went down and met with them. Actually, they met with them in their Metaverse. He paid $15,000 for an office in the Metaverse. And they met with the Brazilians in the Metaverse. And the Brazilians are going to move their operation to Panama. And you think the only reason to move some to Panama is to kind of avoid things. Well, the reason they're moving is because the U.S. won't give their framework. And they're just going to, they need to continue their business, but they don't want the U.S. to build something, say, well, whatever we want, we don't want that. And so they're just going to hide their architecture and hide things in Panama until the U.S. comes out with its regulatory framework. And then they'll become compliant with it and come back out. They just don't want overnight to become illegal and sanctioned and things like that. So Panama is seeing some traffic. It's a really fascinating world, I have to say. It's been a really interesting journey. But again, this is something if you want it to make sense, you should probably think of somebody who lives in India or somebody who, India cut their currency. Modi did actually. I think it was in November of either 2017 maybe. So all of your $20 rupees all became worthless sort of overnight. And if you live in a country, and India has some modern things to it, and I enjoy my time there. Plus, they give me gold when I visit with little elephants carved in and stuff like that. I very much enjoy the Indian people and culture, but there are a lot of countries that aren't that advanced. And if India can take all your money just like that, or Canada, who's really fairly advanced, can decide the truckers, and I'm going to go take all your money and all your crypto, that's the mentality you have to have this stuff make sense. Because if you figure, well, if the government can at any time, and the U.S. has taken people's gold before, we have a history of that as well. But if you think at any time the government can take my retirement, can take all this stuff, that's what you need to be thinking in order to understand cryptocurrency. Because it's not a U.S. thing. We have it pretty good in the United States. This is by far the best country in world history. We have great risk instruments. We have insurance. We have ways to hedge risk in all sorts of facets of our life. So you think, well, why do I need another currency? I can sell money to my kids, and I can use some of the tools they use to pay their bar bills and stuff. But we have it pretty good in the U.S., but that's not the way to think about this. This is something that's kind of blossoming outside of the U.S. where they don't have good risk management, and that they do seize your stuff. If you say something wrong in China, the government will block you from access to everything. If you say something on social media that can be interpreted as negative of the government, they will take all your assets, deny you access to transportation, telecommunications. That's the world that crypto and the decentralization of people are driven by, is to avoid that form of centralized government control. It just turns out that it can be used in cars and boats and places that I'm fascinated every week by new things people come up with. And I'm just like my dad. what are you doing? This makes no sense to me. It's fascinating. You set the students free in this, and again, they don't have to unlearn as much as we do. And you set them free in this, and they are coming up with all kinds of ideas of changing the world. It's fascinating to watch, and it's a great thing to be a part of. It gives me actually, I have more hope now from the students that are coming through right now than I have had in 30 years probably. We've always had smart students. They did the e-commerce thing, and they did the some of the future stuff, and in finance and the healthcare stuff and the IoT stuff. And we've had good students from an intellectual point of view for a long time. But this generation, I think, is really good that they're looking at technologies differently as to how can I fix the problems that your generation has given us. And it's actually, I'm encouraged by it. I wouldn't have said that 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the brilliance was very much interested in how can I get rich. And I think right now what I'm seeing is a real positive, that the brilliance is really how can we form better communities, and how can we diminish the power of those who are driving division and things like that. I'm very encouraged by what I see in the blockchain space. I was at short story quick because I know I'm over and Susan wants to send me Bitcoin. You can just tell. I always tell that look in someone's face.
I don't know. I think I'd like a van coin.
You'll be an initial investor. I was out in Wyoming and at a conference of future of computing, because I'm an AI person. I lead a lot of the artificial intelligence stuff that goes on in the country. And I'm at the table, and the president of Wyoming is here, who used to run the supercomputing center in Illinois, a very highly technical person. The head of the National Science Foundation is here, and there's some other folks I know who are high up, and there's cameras on and everything. And the head of the NSF says, what we need to do is we need to teach children ethics. We need to have ethics in our computer science program. And everybody's, oh yeah, because I look at the guy. I probably shouldn't have done this because I'm there with the University of Arkansas. I said, what are you talking about? I said, you're giving these people $250,000 in debt, and you've polluted the ocean so bad and the air so bad. Now you're going to tell me that I said, you should listen to these people because what they're doing is amazing and it's going to fix the ethical problems of our generation. The guy was just stunned. Nobody talks to the head of the National Science Foundation. He's got big checkbooks. And I was kind of mad about that, to think that he's going to sit and tell students about ethics when I hear them every day, and they already know that, and they know how badly we've goofed up things, and they're going to fix it. They're going to fix it with blockchain solutions. So anyway, I probably shouldn't have said that, but I couldn't help it. I don't know. I have great confidence in the young people today. I think they're going to solve some of these problems through transparency. So this is your super weapon of transparency. So, and the students get it. So any questions at all, I'm happy to answer what I can and forward on to my friends things that I can't. And we can do this every year or every few months if you want to, is if you guys want to dig into this space and come up with questions. I mean, even this vocabulary on these sheets, we fight about this at the International Standards Organization. What's the difference between a digital asset and a digital token and digital cryptocurrency? We're still working out these different definitions. So this stuff is hard. It's not created by business people so much as it is by computer science people. And I have a decent computer science background, but it's still a lot of new vocabulary for me. So it's not easy to think differently in a different language. So there's kind of two steps. The different language being the language of technology, but thinking differently is, wow, running the world without banks, without central banks, without attorneys, just through radical transparency. So it's a different way of thinking, and it's a new vocabulary. So it's a tough road. Again, it took me 3 years to sort of get it. And I was surrounded by people who got it and could answer any question daily. It still took me 3 years. I'm a slow learner, obviously. But I know I've kept you late, so I'm happy to stay around as long as anybody would like to. But Let the camera folks, just in case the Federal Reserve is listening, they don't want to be on camera.
Well, it'd be great if you could come back. I think it would take more than one time for sure.
It's a tough concept. It's a strange world, and there's a lot of things trying to fight it. But the people are saying, "This is what we want," and they're going to win. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and Jamie Dimon all try to kill something, and it thrives. There's something going on. It's like the old song, "What it is ain't exactly clear." There's something going on out here. Buffalo Springfield. What it is ain't exactly clear.
We all know that. Yeah. One, what you say is frightening, but it's also some of what you said is really reassuring.
It's very hopeful. I'm very hopeful by it. I mean, there's going to be winners and losers, but the kids have come up with ideas, and they want to start little companies, and there's people out there funding their ideas that are improve the world ideas. I could come in with a whole list of use cases of things that would give you hope. So I have a fun job right now. But I still want to get paid, in case you're watching out there. All right, well, thank you.